Hi, this is Mark Arnold with yet another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And today we have returning guest Strumm, who is helping me with a guest that we've talked about on the show, but he has never been on the show till today. Tommy Jose, how are you, sir? And how
Oh,
are
I'm
you, Strumm? Sorry.
I'm very good today. Thanks. It's great to finally be with you. We've been talking about it for a while, and
Mhm.
it's nice to sit and chat with both of you. So I'm looking forward to it.
Very cool. Yeah,
I'm
I
doing
don't.
well
Oh,
today.
go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
I'm doing well today. It's been another day for me.
hmm Very good.
Mhm.
And I'm glad you're both here. Camden was going to be here, but he decided to do a little stand-up viewing, which is perfectly fine. So we'll probably get him another time with you. So anyway, but Strum has interviewed me recently. He's been on with, I mean, excuse me, Camden has been on with me recently, interviewing me for my Mad Book, and also has been on with Strum before and other guests. So it's a little bit different to do it with Strum this time and interview you and ask you some questions. So. Um, I guess the basic thing is I don't know a lot about you. I've heard of some about you, but I don't know that much. So, I mean, if you want to start off, just Tommy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your interests and how you got to where you are today with film and animation.
Now, that's a good question, and sometimes it's challenging for me to boil it all down into a couple of sentences. Um, in the film and animation world, I'm really involved for a very long time now in researching and archiving and sharing, producing restorations of early animated cartoons. And I've always had a very intense interest in the early history of animation. So my film work really revolves around finding and archiving and doing something new with these now 100-year-old cartoon films that have been really obscure over the decades, or in some cases, things that have been considered lost or hopelessly unavailable. And so that all means that I'm um, literally handling, I mean, rickety old film reels every day, which are just surrounding me in my apartment. It's a lot of fun, and there are many different facets of it to talk about because there's a lot of physical work in handling film and maintaining it and showing it. There's also a lot of work involved in researching, the origins of it and the provenance of it, and also um, in terms of sharing and showing and restoring films, there's also a lot of work involved in getting multi-talented people together to fix these things up and to present them to the world again. And aside from all that, I'm also a college teacher, so I teach a lot of courses on the history of animation, and some of those are very general. They go from the beginning up through, let's say, the early CG era, and in some cases, I teach classes that have more of a specific focus, like one of my favorites is New York animation, all films that were only made in New York City, which is its own universe, really. So there's lots of stuff, and for people who are new to this topic, I guess it's safe to say that my focus or my specialty really revolves around the first, let's say, 35 years of film animation, early 1900s to 1930s. Mhm.
And Strom, feel free to ask anything, but you gave me questions too, so I don't know. So I guess one of the questions here that you wrote is, what got you into collecting film?
Yeah.
Collecting,
You always do like a very nice introduction to this sort of question at your screenings, and I'd love to hear sort of a shorter version of that if that's possible.
yeah, it's hard to say if it's possible. Now, when I do film screenings, I give a little spiel at the beginning and tell people about why we're here and why I'm showing them this stuff. And, I think folks in general have a pretty good understanding that there is a history of animation and there is, let's say, early Disney and Mickey Mouse and stuff like that. But in my case, instead of simply liking the films and watching them a lot, or getting friends together and talking about them. Um, a lot of what I do really comes out of being a very obsessive collector, somebody who wants to find things and put them back together, and it's sort of like putting a whole body of works together again in one place when it's been scattered to the winds. And so when I was a very, very little kid, I'm talking now 4, 5, 6 years old. Um, I was already very interested in three different things: film, or media in general, film specifically, and animation, absolutely. Also, history in general. I love stories about history and reading about it. And I loved historical objects, antiques, and vintage things. And I very quickly became interested in keeping things and collecting things. And somewhere along the lines, all of these different interests came together. And initially, as a very little kid, all I could really do in that realm was, oh, I can collect videotapes of cartoons, because this is the height of the VHS home video era. I could go around getting my parents and grandparents to buy me little cheapo public domain video collections, Betty Boop and Popeye and Bugs Bunny. So from a very young age, 4, 5, 6, I was already trying to get more and more of this stuff that I liked a lot, so I could see more of it, so I could revisit it and kind of study it. And then um, the work I do now, or have been doing since I'm a little kid, is a little bit more involved in going further back in time and studying the history of film distribution itself. Whereas I grew up in the home video era,
Mhm.
and Mark, you grew up in, I'm assuming, that the TV age,
Yeah. I
t-
mean, if
right,
you wanted a copy of a film when I was a kid, Super 8,
right,
video tapes didn't start coming in until I was like a preteen, teenager, kind of
right.
that age.
And I'm
So,
sort of the young sap that just found anything on streaming, found it on Blu-ray or DVD.
or YouTube,
Yeah,
right?
that too.
Lucky you. Those Super 8 films were expensive back in the old days. Anyway, go ahead.
Mark and I remember when YouTube was brand new. So if that makes you feel any younger, Strum,
Somehow it kind of does, because I remember when YouTube was new, and I have younger cousins, so I know how it feels to know kids that don't remember when YouTube was new.
yeah. So this is something I talk about with my students who are 18, 19 years old now. I say the further back you look in time and look at the history of film distribution and media consumption, the more it was, the less interactive it was, the less you could actually own things yourself. You had to rely on broadcast schedules, or um, repertory screenings if you were lucky to catch any. So if you go back before home video, there were film distributors and film rental libraries that had selections of older films. But um, the bulk of what I really like and study and work with now are films that were made in the silent era, early sound era. A few years after they were initially made, they were considered totally ephemeral and useless and outdated and obscure. So they were mostly neglected and discarded. But in the 1950s, there was a new surge and a resurgence of interest in this stuff, because it could fill TV airtime cheaply. Not because we understand and respect the history of early film and animation, but we have this new medium that is on every day, not 24 hours back then, but it's on every day. And we need cheap and easy to use pre-existing material to show and fill that airtime, especially when TV was still mostly live and there weren't a lot of pre-recorded shows made already. So people went into these film labs and vaults and forgotten collections and started copying older films and making new prints of them and showing them on TV. And that's the stuff that I look for now and find now. either original prints of films from 100 years ago that are very rare and almost impossible to find. But what you can still find here and there are these later copies of films that were made for TV distribution or for a film rental library in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s. And when I was about maybe 8 or 9 years old, and that's being conservative. It might have been slightly younger. It just so happened that I came into contact with a few 16 millimeter films, these older prints made in the 1940s, and were totally foreign object to me. I knew what movies were, but I didn't know what film was because I collected videotapes, and older people around me explained to me these are movies that's on that roll, and the things that you watch on a videotape were once in that other form, like on a roll of film. So I figured out with some more reading and some more suggestions from people that all these older films used to be around in these film prints, and I can't keep thinking about or relying on home video collections. They're very limited. I have to think about and look for these older film prints now. And so by the time I was 10, 11, 12, I was scouring antique shops and flea market kind of thing. And when I was a little kid, still 5, 6, 7, my dad and my mom uh, would take me to flea markets and estate sales. It's something that we kind of just like to do anyway. So once I realized, ooh, I could maybe find these old movies in these places, that was a big thing for me. And that was during the time when the internet was already around, eBay was already around, but we didn't have a computer or internet in my home until I was around 10 or 11. So I was still looking for things in a more old-fashioned kind of way on foot, so to speak. But once we got the internet and I started looking at eBay and looking at websites that film collectors and historians had set up to talk about these things, it just kind of exploded for me. Oh my God, I can talk to other people who know about this stuff. I can maybe find more things to buy on eBay and stuff like that. So 25 years later, it's been 25 years now after getting the internet at home. It's just mushroomed from there. It's just been an ongoing research and really an acquisition process or habit for me.
Yeah, I mean, one person said to me, I think it might have been one of my old history teachers, that, well, history will never end. It never has a beginning either. So there's always something to research from the past, which I think is just incredible because it always provides something to look for. And I'd like to ask, what were some early strives or big accomplishments you made when collecting? What were some of the earliest big strides you made in terms of specific films or gouges or whatnot?
Well, the first few films that I had, film prints, they were Castle Films editions of Farmer Alfalfa and stuff like that. They came in decorative boxes. So to me, that was really cool because it was a visual object you could put on a shelf and stare at and just fantasize about. So initially, I was thinking about film in the same way that I thought about home video, attractive packaging, objects that you could buy in a store. But after a while of learning more about that stuff, and I realized, most of film distribution history is not about packaging for store shelves. It's about utilitarian objects, film reels and canisters and stuff that just sits in a back room somewhere that nobody looks at. That's when I think things opened up for me, and I learned that I had to look for stuff in a more broad kind of way and less of a visual attractiveness kind of way in terms of packaging. So one of the first things that I came across after that light bulb moment was in an antique shop in Pennsylvania. My dad and I used to like to go to Pennsylvania for antiquing, and this is before antiquing turned into antique malls where everything is behind glass and everything looks like sterile. You know, antique shops used to be just sort of like Sanford and Son type places where you
Mhm.
around. So there were still places like that. And one of them was a big, big old house just full of antiques that you could rummage through. And I found a little home movie cut down edition of a silent Walter Lance cartoon. One of the hot dog cartoons, the little Pete the Pup character comes to life. And once I saw that, oh my gosh, it's a real man and it's a little cartoon character and it's a silent film and it's not something that I've ever seen before or heard about on home video or anything like that. That was a major moment for me. Like, oh my goodness, there really are strange and cool things I could find this way that are not readily known about or shown anywhere, even considered to be available. So that was in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And from there on, well, especially once eBay came around and I was able to see auction listings with pictures of film frames, um, that made it easier for me to start learning, well, what kind of distribution companies were out there, what films did they have in the catalogs, what did their title cards look like, what titles did they give these films when they retitled them. And it's hard to pinpoint specifics after that because it just kind of floated for me. But yeah, I would say that that one film with Pete the Pup and Walter Lance was a major breakthrough for me. And thankfully, it's not something that's super rare. But to me, at that age, it was a unique kind of like a holy grail item. And I was still very young. I didn't know how to use projectors very well. So I did something to it that I would never do now. I kind I kind of beat the thing to death. I ran it so many times in the projector, and I was so fascinated as a kid with film damage, wear and tear. I always thought it was really cool to see an old movie and oh, it's got scratches and speckles on it and splices. So as a little kid, if I got a film print, thankfully I had nothing really super rare at that age. I would scratch it up. I would poke
Wow.
holes.
uh,
Purposely.
That's
yeah,
something else the archivist.
it's very easy to damage a film.
It really is.
Yeah, I'm holding. I think what is probably the most common film, but yet I have a very common film to an extent. But I have a interesting variant of it. I think this may have came from you, a Popeye print, but it's a French or Italian 17.5 millimeter print that's all beat up and like all of the sprockets are ripped in some way.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
I was sitting there trying to make the film look like that, and it was, I think, for me, aside from being fascinated with wear and tear and film, I think I was fascinated with the idea that film initially was something that you could see in sequential images in your
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the fact that you could interact with that physical medium and you could manipulate it was really
yeah.
cool to
Doesn't come
me.
out well on the camera. There's some nasty sprocket and line damage on this, but again, it's not that hard to damage these
Now,
these
what's the
prints.
width of that strum? What you said, 17 and
17.5. I've
wow.
never seen a print for sale. I just have this little fragment oddity.
So if you have something like that, is that possible to play, Tommy?
Well,
You have to get a special flatbed or something, or
You
what?
would need a projector for each gouge.
yeah, but you know, it's really tough with super old prints like that because
Yeah.
even the right projector, sometimes the film is really shrunken, or sometimes the projector's not in really it's not in a good state of maintenance and it could damage the film, or the film might be too short to run through it anymore. But
Yeah, this is too beat up to run in any way.
thankfully, we're in an age now when some of the major film scanning companies have made gates that can take almost any format and you could run it through a digital scanner. And so you
Right,
could,
I've seen that. Yeah. Huh.
Hmm.
even if that thing is a wreck, you could have it scanned and you could get whatever's there out of it, which 20 years ago we couldn't really have done that. So things are actually better in some ways now.
Yeah.
Now, why
The
did
old
they
days,
do
you
all
would
the?
probably
Oh,
make a
sorry.
dupe negative if it
Yeah.
was something rare, but not now.
Now, why wasn't there a standard back then? I mean, and what caused there to be a standard? I mean, obviously, 16 became kind of the standard, not 17 and a half or whatever. I mean, what do you know that history of, what finally got everybody on the same page, as it were?
Well, I think it's a combination of different things, and there are a lot of variables at hand. But basically, certain now this is something that I think a lot of folks lose sight of because it's been such a long time ago now. But
Mhm.
when certain uh, of these inventions were brand new, let's say somebody decided, let's make film that is 35 millimeters wide instead of 40 millimeters. Somebody just decided that, and one of those inventions was a brand new thing. There was most likely a patent taken out. So if there was a patent on a specific process or technique or mechanical device, anything related to filmmaking or projecting, that meant that other people couldn't easily come along and replicate that legally and make money off of it. And if you wanted to do that, you had to pay licensing fees or things like that. So I think I could be wrong on this, but I bet one of the reasons why there were multiple formats could have been to partly circumvent legal issues like that. If I wanted a film format, if I want to get into this business and not pay Thomas Edison a license, I'm going to invent my own different kind of thing that works in a similar way and kind of get away with that. So
Right.
yeah, patents are not something that a lot of folks think about with filmmaking anymore because the basics are so old now. The patents expired, 100 years ago. But
Mhm.
that's why there were different animation techniques initially, not only because people decided, well, we can make things look differently if we make the animation in different ways. Some of it was to circumvent patents and legal restrictions. That's another thing we could talk about later. But I think,
Right.
yeah, one of it might have been legal issues. I know 16 millimeter, and again, I'm not sure who exactly decided this and made it into a law of the land, but you know, if 35 millimeter was the norm, the industry standard, um, what's half of 35 millimeter? That would be 17 and a half, right?
Right.
Yeah, that
So
would. I
Yeah,
that's
think
what
the reason
Strum
they
had.
did 16 was to combat piracy.
pretty much. Yeah. So make it harder for people to simply take 35 stock and slit it down the middle. Let's make this slightly different, odder number, even though it's an even number, and just do it that way and make the industry still that much slightly harder to latch on to with anybody and keep some of these things exclusive or proprietary. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned the aha moment, as it were, as you got that one Woody Woodpecker cartoon. At that point, what did you tend to focus on in your collecting and your history learning and whatever knowledge? I mean, I know you said you focus now on the early 20th century, but did you always have that focus too?
Yeah. As a very little kid, toddler age, infant, um, I grew up watching Golden Age animation. I was just in all the great Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Mickey Mouse stuff. I loved all that stuff, and I still do. But there were a few films I saw at that time, same age, that were very early sound or silent era black and white cartoons. Couple very early black and white Mickey Mouse films, couple early Van Buren sound cartoons, and a couple of Felix the Cat cartoons from the 20s. And I looked at those things and they were very strange to me, but in a way that I liked a lot. They looked nothing like this at that time. I thought run of the mill 1940s and 50s animation. These things are striking in a different kind of way. They have a very bold graphic quality to them. Words that I couldn't use when I was 3, but thinking back, I'm thinking, why did that why did that call out to me? There was something different about this big, bold Felix the Cat design or Mickey Mouse design in black and white. And something about monochromatic images have always interested me, photographs and live action films. So even from a very early age, even while I was watching all the later color stuff and liking it a lot, the black and white films and early sound and silent films, they called out to me as being something really special for some reason. And I think the more that I read about their history, the more I realized, there were hundreds or thousands of these things made. They were their own major industry and art form that people enjoyed for many years. And they've become almost totally neglected at this point and forgotten at this point. And I mean, in the early 90s, now a lot of people know about and watch this stuff again. But by the early 90s, not a lot of people were sitting around and worrying about, oh, Mickey Mouse in 1930 or Felix the Cat in 1928. Only a few people were. And I think to me, that realization that these films looked really cool to me and were now kind of neglected and forgotten, it set off another light bulb for me. And I realized, I want to look more into that. I want to see more of these things and find more of them and find out what's up with them. And then eventually I found, gosh, a lot of them are considered lost. They're just not around it. That upset me. That pissed me off.
No,
That's what's, yeah.
I think the answer is yes, but I guess you've been successful in retrieving some of these lost cartoons over the years.
Yeah.
And what's your most, I guess, proudest one, or what was the hardest to find? You choose.
So difficult because the the body of work that I'm looking at probably implicates 2 or 3 thousand films in total, and none of us have any idea how many of them are we ever going to really find or see or anything like that. It's a big mystery, but um, I use the word lost sparingly because there are film prints around. People just haven't found them yet, but people don't know what they are. And I'd say in my career so far, there have been some really cool finds, like one of the film that's on my early Cartoon Roots collection with Colonel He's a Liar in his later form where he appears in live action. It's a film called Detective Story, and Colonel He's a Liar is interacting with a bunch of hobos out in a field and just doing all kinds of crazy stuff with composite cinematography. And that was a film that did not exist apparently until it popped up on eBay in Spain. And this is maybe 2008 or 9. So I said, aha, I've got to get that and do something with it. Because
I'm glad you did. I really like that one.
Did the person selling it know what he had, or is he just saying, "Here, old cartoon film here," or something?
Yeah, most of the people that find this stuff and sell it are not people that specialize in film or know about it or care about
For
it.
better or worse.
Yeah, sometimes I like when that's the case because a lot don't have airs about them. They don't find something and think, oh, it's worth $20,000 or worth $1 million, because it's really not. So sometimes that's okay. And in that case, no, it was just somebody that was probably clearing out a basement or an attic of an elderly person that died, and there were films there, and that's what it was. So there've been a lot of finds like that, and that's just one that comes to mind because I think to this date there are no other film prints of it that have turned up. So that one copy is now the source of every version that people are able to see and enjoy and look at. So that's a really cool thing for me.
Yeah, and I do like that cartoon a lot, and I'm glad it's on your collection. I saw it on the Turner Class Movie Show you did last year, and I would agree with you that it's probably one of the rarest because that one wouldn't have been offered in 16 millimeter. I've never seen anything about the He's a Liars in 16, except maybe one or two. So I would definitely say probably some of the rarest materials are those that were not offered in those home libraries in any way.
They actually were, but I think it was
Mhm.
only one company, one library that had a set of prints. So if you look at, Strumm, Colonel He's a Liar's Knighthood, or Colonel He's a Liar's Forbidden Fruit.
Yeah,
Forbidden
those sort of prints.
Forbidden Fruit is a film that is turned up in nitrate 35 millimeter. There's a restoration of it out there. But before
Yeah.
that, it was a common film in 16 millimeter because um, Murray Glass, a film distributor in California, he had found one of these older prints and made his own copies of it. But yeah, there was one, I think only one film library slash rental company that had gotten its hands on a, a somewhat full run of those later He's a Liar films and made prints of them in the 40s. So there could be more of them out there. And
That's fine, but I guess since it was one library, they didn't make too many prints.
and no,
Sad, but at least the possibility is there, of course.
out there, you never know. Hmm. What's the line from Up? Adventure is out there or something like that. Yeah. Um, so what else was there? That early aha moment, that an example of an early film that I've come across that has come out and meant a lot to people. That was one of them. Colonel He's a Liar. There's another film that I'm also just completely enamored with. That's J.R. Bray's first film, The Artist's Dream, in 1913. And that is a film that has never really been completely lost, but for many decades it was unavailable. It didn't circulate. There were only a couple of copies in two different archives. And that's an example of me spending time and effort and money to access something in another collection, in an archive, and getting it out so that something new could be done with it and people could study it again. Um, so sometimes it's not necessarily that films are lost, but they're lurking somewhere, and you've got to do something to jostle it free and get it seen again.
It
Yeah,
always it always amazes me that some of these films are found like in Sweden or something, just because they're all United States for the most part cartoons, and it just seems strange that it'd be in the oddest places around the world. But I guess that's not really that odd if you're really seeking these type of things, right?
It's not odd. It's a really cool thing, and it's I think another one of these things that folks have lost sight of, or have kind of forgotten about, the fact that major American film studios had a really big, what's the word I want, incentive to have international distribution happening. We can make movies in America, but gosh, there's a whole world out there where we can send prints out to and make box office take on, right?
yeah,
A lot of the American films going way back to the beginning uh, were printed for other countries and were seen in Germany and France and Czechoslovakia and Russia. And it's really difficult for us to say because in a lot of other countries there are all these old films sitting around, but um, there are a lot of stones that have been left unturned. So absolutely nowadays, some of these early silent films from American studios turn up as foreign language prints in other countries.
yeah.
And it's a wonderful thing because in some cases, I'd argue that um, exhibitors and let's call them armchair historians, folks that showed movies and liked them, might have done a better job in other countries of saving things and just packing them away and thinking that they're important. I would say that the French specifically saw more artistry in our silent films than Americans did. And they did a really good job of saving stuff. And
Definitely agree there. a lot of the foreign countries cared a lot more, again, for better or worse, because sometimes it can be hard to identify films that were never copyrighted that turn up in foreign countries. And again, it was easier then because all you had to do was just change intertitles.
Right. So silent films probably have a better shelf life in other countries than sound films do because the issue of training a soundtrack is a lot more difficult. But yeah, and I think also in America um, the motive for making and showing movies is probably a lot more profit driven than it was in other countries, and that's why maybe in European countries specifically the people that, yes, there were showmen making money on this stuff and that became their living, and there were filmmakers there. But I think as a culture, as a sensibility, movie viewing and appreciation is probably more of an artistic and intellectual concern than it was in America. Where here it's a business, it's um, it's something to buy, spend money on and make money on. And a lot of the general public is looking at it as ephemeral entertainment. We want to laugh right now and then forget about it. We have critics here all along. We have historians pretty early on, but I think as a culture, um, a lot of the European nations were thinking about it on different levels than we were in those early periods. And that's why they just took to it and held on to it and appreciated it.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and I'm thinking to George Melee, his A Trip to the Moon was so revered that even in the late 1920s, around that period, when no one could find a copy, they were actively looking to preserve it, find it, and again that speaks a lot to the culture in Europe and finding these films and locating them better than what we were doing, which was just they were just commodities. Once if someone wanted them, they could have them. Really, there really weren't that many restrictions, except for some studios that were a bit more pristine with what they want to do, but then they just neglected them, they deteriorated, and they became lost.
Yeah, it's so funny. I've always been interested in the Bray Studios.
Mhm.
That's the first successful animation production company. And they did a pretty good job of, let's call it, passively keeping and passively preserving some of their library. J.R. Bray was a pretty tight-fisted guy. He was um, always interested in making as much money as he could without spending as much as he could. And in that, he, I think he held on to a lot of his film library because he always saw that there could be um, ancillary sources of income in it later on, even though it was old stuff, even though it wasn't, on everyone's minds anymore. If he could make a few bucks with a film rental print, with school borrowing something or showing something, there was value in that to him. Whereas the bigger and later studios would look at their earlier material and I think just decide, this is old. Nobody, will just throw it away. Why are we spending money on?
Mhm.
We care about the next best thing, not yesterday's old junk. But Bray's very interesting to me, and he kept a vault log of all the stuff that he had produced and was storing. And this is a book that I think he started in the 20s, and he kept annotating into the 1930s and 40s. And I've looked at it many times and seen in the late 30s and early 40s, he would keep adding notes to it and saying that certain films were melting and were being discarded because he wasn't throwing them away. He was just seeing in real time, oh, I guess old movies go bad. I guess we're going to throw it away. The one thing he didn't do, because I think he realized, you're probably not going to make a ton of money on this old stuff. He didn't start copying everything that was going bad. He just noted it down. It's melting, we're discarding it, and that's the end of it.
Hmm.
But a lot of other studios didn't even bother, I think, keeping notes like that or caring very much. So yeah, it's an interesting case study to me.
It's
Are
really
you
fascinating.
are
I
you
can't
one
think
of
of another
the
case
oh
like that.
sorry, yeah. Are you one of the founders then, or the founder of the Bray Animation Project then? Is
Well,
that
that was something that I kind of cooked up and decided there should be a website about this studio, and there should be a resource to read about it and see filmography. And granted, it's not a perfect resource. It's not a complete filmography. There's still a lot of gray areas there, and that website's in serious need of an overhaul. But, there's only one of me, but yeah, that was something. That was another one of these things that I thought was necessary. You know, there was the first successful animation studio. Why are there no, I don't know, concerted efforts to research it or think about it even? So that's what I wanted to do. And I have to revisit it and add more to it. So thanks for reminding me.
Go to it. Okay.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite Bray characters or series or particular films?
Well, that's interesting because Ray was in the business of producing these series that were made by many, many different independent, or I should say individual directors. Whereas, you know, if you look at Disney, of course, the aesthetic evolves over the years from one thing into another, but it's kind of always Disney overlooking it. It's kind of always one director or another. But Bray is really interesting because of the 500 plus animated films they made, they're so wildly different. There's so many different characters and styles and time periods, and it's hard to narrow it down. But I'd like to say that probably the top for me is Bobby Bumps. And Bobby Bumps is really cool to me for being, for one thing, on a technical level, the first cartoon series to really highlight cell animation and make really effective use of it. So on a technical level, that's pretty cool to see Earl Hurd be, let's call him, I'm not going to call him the only inventor of cell animation, but the guy who really perfected it and really came out with it front and center. Seeing him use it and evolve with it as time went on. So Bobby Bumps, in terms of character design and visual aesthetic, Earl Hurd, like J.R. Bray, these are people that are inventing a new industry and a new art form, but they're already entering middle age. So they're coming into it with sensibilities and styles that might be a little old hat by then. Might be a
Yeah.
little,
Earl Hurd always drew in a Victorian style. He was at Disney in the 1930s. I've seen some of his work there. He's still drawing characters that could have interacted with Bobby Bumps.
right. So it's really cool to me to think that um, early animation, early studio made animation in the 19 was not stuff that really reflected brand new and modernist styles in cartooning. These are things that are really like getting to watch a Victorian comic strip in motion. And it's cool to see that that happened and it's been preserved on film. The Bobby Bumps series is also really fun to me because of how sarcastic but subtle the humor is. You really have to be focused entirely on the visuals. It's a silent film. You can't turn away and get distracted, miss something. It won't make sense. You have to pinpoint your focus on these characters and follow what they're doing. Earl Hurd's humor was very understated. It was subtle. It was kind of smart and intellectual. So you really have to pay careful attention. But once you do, and if you really get into it, it's clever stuff. Colonel He's a Liar is, you know, it's an important character. It's the first kind of fully serialized animation star. But J.R. Bray's own version of it was a really stilted and jerky thing. Just kind of jerks around and
Yeah.
you know, makes
Yeah,
big.
well, compared to Bobby Bumps, what would you rather watch, a little boy or an old man?
Well, I wish they would have interacted with each other because that would have been really cool.
There's that one comic on your Bray site.
Right. Once other people were doing He's a Liar for Bray. Vernon Stalling and Walter Lantz was cutting his teeth at Bray on that. Um, that's when it becomes a more interesting character to me. And so with Bray, I think it's safe to say I appreciate all of it. I like it all a lot. I want to re um, what's the word I want? I want to um, refa-
Re-release.
yeah, refashion and re-release a much more full body of those films. But Bobby Bumps comes out on top for me. And one of the things I really want to do is put together another Blu-ray volume of those films, a volume two. And
Yeah, I have the first Bobby Bumps, and I admittedly didn't really think much of them. I was kind of like passing them off, but when I watched them, I became a Bobby Bumps fan because they are entertaining. They do have that humor that you were talking about. They really do play like very good comic strips of the time, and I was surprised at just how good the humor landed in some of them. And you took the words exactly what I was going to say, a Victorian comic strip.
the nice thing about them, uh, don't go by YouTube standards, but there's actually a really good survival rate on that series. And just a note for viewers and listeners, if something is not on YouTube, it does not mean that it's lost. It could still be out there.
It's it's,
Yep.
pro- it's probably heavily under copyright. That's probably why it's not up there.
That's
But
the next, but in their vast collections and archives of films that there's just not enough money and manpower around to digitize it to get it out there. In my case, I've got a lot of films, but for me, in order to fully realize the potential of them and also to kind of support myself in all of this, I have to be careful about how I handle the material and get it back out there. So I don't dump everything on YouTube. I engage in these really careful and long-term projects to make a nice restoration of something, and then bring it back out in a home video collection or in a TCM show or something like that. So
Yeah.
Bobby Bumps, there will, and I think there should be more of those out there. And let's wait and see and hope for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to ask a little bit more about you sharing your collection because I think the first way you did that would be your Cartoon Carnival screenings or other shows that you do. How did those come about, and what were the challenges in making them initially happen?
Well, I started doing these Cartoon Carnival shows in June this year. It would be exactly 15 years ago. And
Hmm.
I started that up as a college kid. I was about 19 years old. And by that point, I'd been collecting a lot of this stuff for a few years already. So I was building a bigger and bigger physical film collection. Um, I think there were two things at play for me. I was really interested in that time in finding more people that could enjoy and appreciate this stuff. And I knew they would be out there, but they hadn't really been pulled together in any physical space, especially here in New York City. There had been people in the 70s and 80s and 90s who would screen classic and early animation, people like Leonard Maltin and Greg Ford and those kinds of folks. But in terms of a physical community and a physical place, it was lacking. And so at that age, I wanted to try and get something like that going again. And I noticed for me that I have a lot more fun watching these films with other people. I work with them constantly. I'm constantly watching them. For me personally, by myself, it's kind of a deadpan experience. But if I'm together with a crowd and I'm showing stuff and people are laughing, it comes out of me more easily. So I really like that. So there was a social element to it, but um, I was also one of these kids who was spending a lot of my own time and hardly any pocket money that I had trying to collect this stuff and make something out of it. Doing public screenings was, I think, also a way for me to try and um, make a little bit of that pocket money back so that I could put some of that back into the expenses that I had buying these films and maintaining them. So there was also a financial um, aspect to it as well. So the difficulty in it was being still a teenager, not having any experience in producing an event or finding venues or selling myself even. I'm just this kid who wants to show cartoons. You should book me. You should have. I was not a hard sell. I'm an introvert. So I would say shyness was a big issue for me at that age. If you come to one of my shows now, you'll see that I
Did it lag out for you?
Tommy's frozen right now. Well,
was getting
there.
to I was getting to pull this off after a few, bumpy twists and turns. But gosh,
Yeah, like the lag we just had.
right. Yeah, if I'm doing this stuff, I'm actually kind of trying to make a public figure out of myself. And I never did it out of ego. It was just, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to be the face of it. So I have to kind of carry it and talk to people about it. I struggled with that a lot. I was very nervous about that for many years. So it was initially finding places and getting them to agree to host this kind of showing for me. And for me, it was selling myself and trying to promote what I was doing. Ever since then, once it kind of established itself into an ongoing series that a lot of people had seen and accepted and have known about in New York City, um, initial and sometimes ongoing struggle is to be doing screenings in somewhat underground places that don't have a lot of um, front and center notability to them. They're not on a main street. They're not in the coolest or hottest part of town. That means that it's not always easy to get people to go out to those locations. So sometimes I still struggle in getting people in the seats, getting them to know about it, hear about it, or even if I've got, 2,000 people on a local event mailing list, half of them are going to be away on vacation or busy with something when I have a show. So they're not all going to show up. So there's always this constant push. Um, and so there's a lot of work involved in putting the shows on. There's 16 millimeter screenings. So that means that I have to go and pull the prints and wind through them and compile the show reels just for that one program and then break it down again afterwards. There's a lot of physical work involved and time involved. Half of it's labor of love. I like doing it a lot. And the other half of it is um, it does more or less makes a little bit of money for me that I could put back into now my biggest expense is film storage.
Hmm.
When I started out, I was a teenager, a little kid at home. I could have a few dozen or 100 or two film prints at home with me, but now the archive I've got has probably not only cartoons, other things too, probably upwards of 5,000 individual film elements. That's massive. That costs a lot to store. So um, events and other things now for me are also a way to try and upkeep those expenses and cover them. So um, it's a fun thing to be there and experience, but there's a lot of work and expense that goes into it. So good question there.
Yeah, I've been to a few of your shows, and I really do enjoy going each time.
Good, I'm glad. Well, you're the
Yeah.
perfect audience because you not only enjoy this kind of thing, but you know a lot more about it than the average guest does, and so
Yeah.
you really get into it on a deeper level, which is great.
Yeah, yeah. I remember first going to them. I understand the shyness because I was even shy to introduce myself to you or co-host Nelson because I already knew you guys on Facebook a little bit by then. But again, I was a little shy just to say hi.
Yeah, well,
But I really do have a great time. And again, from there going on your screens, you've done Blu-ray releases and Turner Classic Movies. I have to ask, which came first, doing Turner Classic Movies or a home video release? Well, actually, I have to say home video because you were doing those DVDs back then.
that's so yeah. Well, when let's agree that a home video release is something that proper home video release is something that has store quality packaging that you could put
Yeah,
that somebody would look at and say, that looks cool, but it also looks professional. I'll buy that.
yeah,
Um, that was something that came partly out of having put together a show for TCM and actually cutting my teeth in producing and directing a set of individual film restorations. So now that I had gotten a little bit of money from doing that and had a little bit of experience in a more formal way, the next step, which was always going to be for me, that was the breakthrough moment. The next step would be, okay, now I can actually get material like that together and assemble it for home video collections. And
mm,
that timeline, early 20, early 2010s, this also corresponds with newer and more effective forms of film scanning and restoration software. So prior to that, I was too young. Uh, I was too young, and the technology, I think, would not have been up to speed to present really good looking versions of the kind of stuff that I have. So we had to wait a little bit for that to happen. So
yeah.
but before that, so 2012 is when I had my first TCM show, and then late 2014 is when the first Cartoon Roots Blu-ray is being finished up and packaged. But if you go further back in time, prior to 2012, what I was doing before that was putting my own DVD-R, homemade collections of cartoons together.
Mm.
These are that I like a little film pirate, copied from old
You got to make your own public domain collections.
public domain VHS tapes that came out in the 80s that nobody knew about anymore. And
There
it
we go
was,
again.
yeah, public. And or by 2008 or so, I finally had my own standard def film telecine unit, 16 millimeter so I could run one of my own prints through that and make a simple raw DVD copy of it. So I was making DVD-R collections of some really rare but really ratty looking stuff that if people were really interested in this and wanted their own copies of it at home, you could buy something from me. $15, $20. Yeah.
Now, how did you get involved with TCM? Did they go to one of your shows, or did you reach out to them? How did that begin?
That was a funny thing that happened. Okay, let's see. Let's trace the steps now. 20, 2011, something like 2011 or so. A friend of mine was somebody who's really interested in comics and animation, was at I think a book signing somewhere in Manhattan for some comics anthology that came out. And at this book signing was a reporter from a new subdivision of Fox News, of all things. A new subdivision of Fox News called Fox News Latino, if you can believe it. And this really cool young guy that was a brand new reporter for this brand new subdivision of Fox News was there at this party to kind of just cover this thing. And my friend was there and just chatting with him and told this guy about me. I guess he thought it would be an interesting point of conversation. And I don't know if it came up in conversation then or if this reporter contacted me and it came up at that point, but he discerned that I was part Hispanic, and he felt, oh, this is a guy that knows and does some interesting stuff, and he has some Spanish speaking ethnic background in him. Maybe he'd be cool to do a story on for this new uh, news agency subdivision that we have. So he got in touch with me and asked me, can I do a story on you? This sounds like some pretty cool stuff that you're interested in, and you collect all these things. What he wound up doing was coming to my house, my apartment at the time, I lived with my mom. I was still a pretty young guy, and they did a shoot there. They did camera and everything. They were going to do a news piece, a video piece about it, and it showed in the Fox News Latino segment on Fox News again, 2011 or
I
something like
can't believe they ever did that.
that. It's such a weird thing for them. It was good for me, but for them, it was such a strange thing. Apparently, I don't know if it was the producers or viewers wrote in. Apparently, people liked the piece so much because it was such a cool topic that the producers decided, we should get this Tommy guy on the Fox News set with us. Let's bring him in. Let's talk to him. Let's revisit some of those video pieces that we shot. And I was on the set with, of all people, the one and only Kimberly Guilfoyle, which of some son's girlfriends now. So
Is this an episode of The Twilight Zone?
so the oh my God, it's so strange. I was on that set talking to Kimberly about old 16 millimeter.
Have you heard of Bobby Bumps?
Yeah, so weird, but more people got to see that because it was a live Fox News thing. More people got to see it. And I don't know anything about political affiliations in this case or what, but because there was that exposure, somebody really high up in Turner Classic Movies caught wind of it, and their head of programming got in touch with me and said, I think that story about you was really cool. What you're doing is really interesting. Let's get together sometime. Let's talk about it and see if maybe there's something we could do together. So I had a little sit down with that person. We talked a bit, and I think they understood I was doing something interesting, but I was still a young guy. I wasn't really established in any way. And if we could do something together, it would probably take some time to figure that out. And I would need some kind of help and guidance with that. So luckily for me, it was a really kind of caring and nourishing kind of connection. Whereas in a lot of the media world, things are really cutthroat and fierce, especially in the New York area. But this was a really kind and understanding connection that was made, and it was wonderful. And then by 2012, we debuted a set of films that were newly pretty okay, well restored, and early silent animation that had never been shown on TV before. And at that time, it was mixed into some other programs of animation that they got together. So I was going to be a part of a bigger presentation. And I was not there for it on set, but I think the good thing that happened was that they agreed to get Jerry Beck to come on and co-host that with Robert Osborne. So the TCM viewers got to see this rare material with their favorite TCM host, Robert Osborne, and with a trusted, long-time, really well-established animation historian guiding them through it and introducing them to it. So that's how that happened. That's a short version of the story, but that connection, predates the store quality home video collection. Yeah. Oh man.
Well, I'm glad. And I again really like both your sets and the Turner shows, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of the Turner shows coming whenever that happens.
Me too. I think there will be more.
Great.
Like to hold out hope and see how things go. And also hard to say what will happen in the long run, but I'm personally really excited about the new MeTV Tunes thing that is happening, which is great for all of us in our field, in our industry.
Yeah, especially since Jerry is, of course, working with that.
Yes, Jerry is really instrumental in, I'd say, curating and heralding. And so that's going to be really great for them because any media conglomerate could have come up with that idea. People love cartoons. Yeah,
It takes someone who really loves it to put it together and make it a love affair.
Yeah, somebody who spent 50 years specializing in that and has worked in the distribution business, has written history books, has done screenings and shows, just kind of has his hand in every aspect of it. That's who they want and need
Yeah.
to get into something successful. So I think we're all going to really enjoy the results of that.
Yeah, I agree. Moving back to your releases, after you did your initial cartoon run set, did you know that you were going to do a Bray set, or was it a bit in the air of what you wanted to do next for releases?
Well, um, one thing I'll say is that I always knew early on in making one or two, well, just one initially, professional home video collections. I always intended it to be a series where we could come out with more and more collections of different things, different characters, different series, different studios. And the difficult thing for me was to decide which one next, what comes next. There's so much to pick from. But that was still around the time that the Bray Animation Project website was fresh on my mind. It was still a somewhat new thing. And I still think the appreciation and the knowledge about the studio was not as strong as it could have been yet at that time. So for me, I think it was second nature. Let's make the second release a focus on the Bray Studios. There was a little bit of a gap there in between releases, but the Bray Studio set then and now, talk about long gaps in time, then and now, it was also only designed to be something that would preface future collections that focused on specific characters or specific series. Now, to this day, I've had 5 collections come out in that series. Um, it's a series that I really think if I had the time and the money and the support, there could be 40 collections out.
Would love to see that.
It would be amazing, but these things take so long to do and they're so expensive.
Yeah.
It's almost mind numbing. And I'm glad most people out there don't have to think about that because it would spoil the fun for them, but it takes so long to do. But if money weren't an issue and time and effort were less of an issue, let's say if I had um, a bigger revenue source or better funding from different areas and could employ a lot more people to restore the films more quickly. Um, I'd love to have 1 or 2 or 3 new releases every year and just continue.
I wish that was a more sustainable, but in some ways the wait has actually helped because there's improvements in scanning, restoration, and in the materials that have shown up because while we're waiting, these films just keep showing up.
Right. Now I look at what we did 10 years ago and I think, gosh, we do stuff so much better now. Restoration. It's not,
I remember seeing the Jolly Rogers on Turner Classic Movies, and it looked very. You redid it, right? It was greatly improved. I remember.
new scan, new restoration work. It's almost like night and day just in a 10-year period.
Yeah,
So um, that's another thing. It has hurt financially, and I think it has also hurt in other ways for there to be such long gaps between projects being finished and new home video collections coming out. But the one upside is that in that meantime, we have gotten better technology in our hands. We've gotten better at using the technology. So the stuff we come out with looks better now. And more films continue to turn up in the meantime. So that means that there are more things we can use and put out in these collections. So um, I will always regret that 10 years into this, there aren't 15 or 20 collections instead of 5. But we
yeah.
are working on fixing that a little bit. There are currently 5 or 6 of them that are in different stages of completion. A couple of them so far. One of them is an early out of the inkwell collection. That's going to be the first of multiple volumes. There's a Dinky Doodle talking about Walter Lance, Dinky Doodle. That's also the first of maybe 1 or 2 volumes, and one that I've had in process for a few years now. One of several or many Farmer Alfalfa collections.
Great.
Yeah, which is going way back, way back. One of my favorite characters, this old coot nobody likes.
It's like he's a liar, but he's actually likable somehow.
He's sort of like Archie Bunker to me. He's got problems, but he's actually got a heart underneath all those crusty layers of, annoyance.
If Farmer Alfalfa's Archie Bunker, then what's Colonel He's a Liar? He fought in the Great War.
A liar. I don't know. Maybe he's just Joe Biden. Hard to say. Um, yeah,
Maybe where was he on January 6th? Colonel He's a Liar.
he's a liar. He's a good guy. He tells tall tales, but he's a good guy. He doesn't. I don't think he ever wants to hurt people or anything.
He
So
just
yeah,
wants to lie about his accomplishments.
right, exactly. So I don't know if it came up in any of your questions, Strunger or Mark, but one thing I'd like to talk about, since we're on the topic of these home video collections and restoration projects, releases, is it goes back to what I said about the initial idea that I had when I made my first proper home video release. It was designed to be one of many future collections. The Cartoon Roots series, it's supposed to be a reflection of my own archiving and collecting habits, which for me is comprehensive. It covers all silent era animation, any studio, any character. So the idea all along, and what I've been working towards all along, has been projects that will focus on all the many different characters and series and studios. So um, I think there's been sort of a blind spot out there in talking to people about it and getting feedback from them on what I've done so far. Um, it's something that I think I have to keep telling people about or reminding them about. The idea has always been uh, cover all those other characters, cover all those other series. So if if there is a series that has not already been covered by a restoration project of mine in finished form, like a home video collection or a TCM show, it doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it. It does not mean that I haven't already started in on it. That is the idea, that is the goal. And a lot of what I do are very, very long-term projects. Sometimes we start fixing up a film and we realize, you know what, this has major problems with it that would only be solved if we can get our hands on another print. And it might take 5 years to get access to that other print that we already know about. So that's why these delays happen in some cases. It just takes so long for each step of the way to be completed. So this is to say that the Cartoon Roots collections will cover, and I've already started work for years now on covering other characters in series like Farmer Alfalfa, Aesop's Fables, or early Disney series, Alice comedies, and Laugh-O-Grams, and that kind of thing. Um, any others you could think of? Mutt and Jeff is something that we've been working on in some capacity for several years now, and so it's a lot of it's a waiting game, and it's a very slow chess game. Yeah.
A lot of great stuff. And again, like some of those earlier sets in the Turner shows definitely give a good sampler to that because they've had Mud and Jeffs and some of the Disneys and the Farmer Alfalfas. Remember the 2022 one had the funny farmer and his cat fable that I really liked.
Yeah, that's this Century of Animation programs. We've done two of them for TCM. The first one was 1922. So I don't know if you've seen those, Mark, but it's kind of like a look back on animation from 100 years ago. So in 2022, we had one called Century of Animation Showcase 1922. We did one last year for 1923. I don't know if we're going to do 1924 again this year, but um, it's cool to me because just within 1 hour of programming, you get to see the wide variety of styles that were being done in the studios at the time. So uh, Farmer Alfalfa versus Alice comedies, or Out of the Inkwell, or that kind of thing. And they're vastly different. And you get to see, oh, Disney's team was quite far behind Fleischer at that time. That would change later. Yeah.
Well, certainly wasn't Disney like the first or one of the first out in Hollywood anyway.
He was
Everything
the first
was,
in Hollywood,
yeah, yeah. So,
and he was the last to learn how to draw.
I don't know if he ever fixed that problem, but I don't think it really even mattered after a certain point. He realized, you know what, I can't draw really. So
Yeah.
these other guys are gonna draw for me. Yeah.
I wanted to
They
touch
feel
on
like they're the
one.
only ones that have the goal to call themselves commies, but they really aren't.
No, you're right. Yeah.
I wanted to touch a little bit on your teaching, if you don't mind, because you say you teach classes. What if one was to take one of your classes, like, you know, if I was a zillion years younger in college, what would I learn from Tommy in his class?
Well, let's say you're taking an introductory animation and history course, and maybe you're an animation student, you want to be an animator, or maybe you're taking it as an elective from another discipline, like you could be in cartooning or advertising art or photography. Um, all of those students are basically in the first few weeks going to get an overview of early pre-cinema optical toys and early history photography and early film history. So they understand all of the different technologies and forms of art that came together around 1900 and became film animation. Um, One of the first things we do in most of those classes is to look at a zoetrope in person, but also have each student make a script for the zoetrope. So even if they're using digital tools, or even if they're a filmmaker and they're not talented in drawing cartoons, they're going to try anyway and just see what it was like to have to physically make this kind of thing and make animation happen. So really basic, rudimentary, early foundation in that sense. I'd say probably more than some other instructors. I spend a lot of time on the 1900s through the 1930s so that the kids get a pretty good idea of how the animation industry formed,
Mhm.
and studios really drove that, especially for animation students, because they're going to be concerned with working in an industry for the most part. And I think it helps them to understand almost right from the start, it was a heavily commodified thing and it was a cutthroat business. So let's look at it. Let's think about that. So I suspect, and based on past experience, people, other instructors kind of ram through, or just kind of rumble through. Okay, Windsor McKay and Bray and Felix the Cat and Disney. Okay, now let's talk about Golden Age animation. Let's
Yeah.
talk uh, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Tex Avery and gosh, all that beautiful stuff. I spend more time talking about rickety, silent, black and white things. So they get, I think, a fuller understanding of how the industry formed before the artistry was perfected. And so in the introductory classes, um, there's also a greater emphasis on American animation. And it's not only a reflection of my own preferences, but really, again, it's a reflection of the fact that the industry was an American thing. It
Mhm.
started that way. And even when folks in other countries were making animation in terms of creating an export product, which film can or should be, they couldn't really even compete with the Americans. You know, they did great things in other countries, but the industry was a fiercely American thing. And in other classes, other electives like World of Animation, these are places where we will dive deeper and look at films from other countries and other sensibilities. So, um, yeah, I would say my introductory courses are a little bit heavier on American animation in its first few decades. And um, gosh, I still try to throw Japanese animation in there because otherwise they would have my head. Uh, all people, all young people like Japanese animation. And what I like to tell them is that it's a wonderful world unto itself. It's really neglected. In the colleges that have animation programs, there should be courses on it. There should be history classes on Japanese animation. So
Mhm.
that's an example of how I try to um, give a nod to other things that are sometimes neglected and
Yeah.
overlooked, and also throw a bone to the students. They like that stuff, so we should talk about it. But the thing I like about it is they almost all come out knowing who Bobby Bumps is. So that means a lot.
You converted them to your church.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an art student in animation. I don't take your classes. I'm not in any of your schools, but I did take history of animation. I did somehow know a lot. The teacher even had me improve a few lessons somehow,
Well,
which I thought was crazy.
that's the thing, Strumm. Um,
I'm not
maybe it's
supposed to know this much.
yeah. I was like that in elementary school and high school. Anytime teachers were talking about film, I sometimes knew more things about certain things than they did, and I added to it. But aside from that, I think a lot of my classes are better for students that have only a minor understanding or no understanding of this stuff.
Mhm.
It's not something where somebody like you would come in and know stuff. And I say that because um, I think my job as an educator is to simplify and generalize things in a way that make it easy for almost anyone to understand. Um, if we spend too much time talking about Earl Hurd, they're going to miss the point of what animation was like in general, 1960. I have to really water it down. I have to generalize a lot, not necessarily dumb it down, but um, I have to make it very almost simplified in that sense. I also have a lot of students from other countries where English is not their first language. So I also have to be very mindful and considerate of that. Am I saying things and presenting things in a way that they will understand? Um, so I don't see students coming into my room and think that they need to become as knowledgeable as I am or become carbon copies of me or sit there and listen to me talk because I think that that's really important, like as an egotistic thing. I think that I'm there to share stuff with them so that they might hopefully get a basic understanding of what it means and for them to decide, does it resonate with me? Does it mean something to me? Does it inform me in some way? And in some cases, it will. In some cases, the students might say, this stuff doesn't really call out to me very much, but at least I think it was a fun way to learn about history in general, to watch films and see what films were like at that time. And so, yeah, education is something I like a lot. It's also something that I think I always wanted to do. I know a lot of historians set out to write books, but I kind of always wanted to show people these and maybe talk a little bit about them. And a class is a really great way of doing that without having to go to a copy editor and worry about spelling and stuff.
Mm.
Yeah,
I would
I
love
was
to
not
do
meant to take an animation history class.
I would love to do more like what you do, except the thing is, I don't have the degree in it. And, because nowadays it seems like you have to have a degree in it before you can, expound any sort of opinion or knowledge or anything, about animation or comic books or anything like that. It's frustrating.
It's a weird thing because I think there's some things in the arts and the media where advanced degrees don't necessarily mean anything. They don't necessarily prove that you are knowledgeable or talented as a historian or as a anything really. Sometimes they help, and sometimes the process of getting those degrees um, further perfects your own, you know, research acumen or your ability to write or your ability to speak. Absolutely. But um, I think the whole education system has problems, and there are lots of issues with that we don't have to get into now. But basically, there's so many knowledgeable people, talented people that could be educators that might never get the opportunity because of some of those roadblocks, which might not actually be necessary. Um, Sometimes gatekeeping is good in certain forms, in certain settings, but in other cases, it's almost like a pay to play kind of thing. Oh, you for that advanced degree? Okay, you could come in and try to be one of us, and you sort of
Yeah.
yourself that.
Well,
I don't.
with my lowly BA in broadcasting, I use the podcast like this and my books as a forum. I've occasionally done some public speaking and stuff like that, but I have been just categorically told if you don't have an MA or a PhD, you're pretty much stuck, as guest speaker every so often. But we don't need to go into that. I'm just saying it's my shortcomings on this.
Yeah, I'm just gaining associates, and I'm just like, is this really going to make a big difference if I don't get a 4 year? It kind of bugs me, but I'm fine with just having associates at this point.
From it depends on what you want to do,
Yep.
and the other thing is you might think you want to do something and it won't turn out that way. You'll wind up doing.
Yeah, I'm not content to be in one thing. I can say that easily.
Mark, what I'd say for you is that if you really are interested in guest lecturing or maybe adjunct teaching, um, get to know people who are already teachers
Yeah.
and try to work in that way. Somebody you already know has a class that you can appear in
Mhm.
and something in. That's one way of getting in through the back door sometimes. I won't
Yeah.
go into detail. There are other ways of making yourself known and proving yourself without having to go buy the book, as it were.
And I have done some of that. And that's kind of how the way I've winded through life. It's like, oh, you won't publish me? I'll publish myself. And now I have a publisher. But, it's like things like that.
People underestimate how much you can do or how far you can get by simply knowing people, not
Mhm.
just people. You also have to be a good person and a likable person. You can't just be likable without being good. That doesn't work. I've had a lot of experience with people who try to be likable, but they're not good. And so things don't work out. But if you're a good hearted, good natured person, you're likable, and you're also knowledgeable and talented, as long as you meet people and try to do things with people, you can get things going for you. Things could happen for you
Mhm.
without necessarily going buy the book.
Yep. I'll
Mhm.
agree. And that's always good advice to hear again.
Yep.
Don't be a malignant narcissist, basically.
Me?
Well,
Well,
that's
on that note, it's my show. No, just kidding. I think we kind of covered the gamut, though, seriously. But I mean, Strum, did you have any more questions for Tommy before we go? Or
Um, is there anything after what you currently have planned with Dinky and Inkwell that you'd like to touch on a little bit?
well, not really. I would say that there's a lot more in the works, and I have to be um, careful,
Careful.
clever about how I disclose that and how I roll it out. And um, carefulness is very important to me. All the things that I do and all the projects that I have in the works are things that I've crafted in a very deliberate kind of way. And that's really to try and make the most of it and the best of it as possible rather than being willy-nilly about it. I notice a lot of folks get interested in this kind of material and they get very quickly excited about it, and then it sort of just spirals for them. They kind of become a little bit rabid about it. But um, archival work and historiography and producing programs and home video collections, these are very tricky and very tedious and very detail oriented things that have to be done carefully. And so sometimes one way of preserving that carefulness and being um, just smart and savvy about it is to uh, do things in kind of a guarded way, to wait for a good opportunity or a
Hmm.
good to say, this is what's happening next, and this is what it's going to be. So I gave you a couple of hints already. Um, projects that have been in the works for several years already. Uh, Farm and Alfalfa, restorations, other series as well. But you could look forward to, let's say, Cartoon Roots series specifically in terms of number of volumes, uh, doubling probably within the next year or two as those current collections become completed.
Can't
And
wait for that.
yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to go from 5 releases probably to about 10 within a couple of years. So that's going to be really fun. And
Mhm.
I just want the snowball effect to continue from there. So eventually we will get to that magic 40 number. That'll be crazy, but yeah.
That was a great answer. Not a very direct one, but I again respect you, and it was a great answer overall for saying that instead of just saying I can't talk about this, I can't talk about that, you gave a very discreet answer as to why you can't and what's the best way to approach these, which I heavily respect. So I thank you again.
Thank you. You know, we're in an era of immediate gratification. Everybody wants everything now. Why can't we have things on TV or on YouTube or on home video right now? The way
Hmm.
it really works is that good stuff takes a long time to do, and we have to be patient. That's all there is to it. So I appreciate you understanding that stuff. I do.
Of course.
All right. Well, to wrap things up, I guess I'll give you, Tommy, the floor just to kind of plug your videos again or your shows if you have any coming up in the next couple months, or anything on TCM.
Um, Upcoming screenings. Well, I've got a few in the New York City area. One show that I do every couple of months is called Saturday Afternoon Cartoons. That's at a theater called Metrograph in Lower East Side in Manhattan. And then I've got another series that I do every 3 months in a theater called Roxy Cinema, also in Manhattan, called Peculiar Puppets. Those are weird, obscure, kind of creepy puppet and stop motion films that I like to bring out and show to people. So if any of you listeners or viewers in the New York City area are into this kind of thing, look for my social medias to learn about that. Tommy Stathes Cartoon Carnival Facebook page and Facebook group. Those are good ways of getting involved. And in terms of other things to talk about or plug, um, I think
Well,
it's
well, on your existing DVD sets, you can replug those. But yeah.
The Feeling Folly set is back in replication, right?
yes, the Cartoon Roots, I said there were 5 collections already in existence. The first one, it's just called Cartoon Roots. That's been out of stock for a while, but I'm trying to fix that within the next month or two. So probably by July or August, you'll see that again on Amazon. That's the main place where I sell this stuff. But
Okay.
also there's the Bray Studios collection, the Bobby Bumps collection. The most popular one has always been Halloween Haunts, and that's a favorite that we're going to put back into stock very soon. And one that came out in the early part of the pandemic, and I think never really got a lot of fanfare, but the people who know about it really like it, is Otto Messmer's Feline Follies. So that's a collection of very early Felix the Cat cartoons, and
Great collection.
Yeah, and I hope over time more people get to hear about it and know about it. So maybe some of your listeners will know about it now. That'd be cool.
I have one last question. Are there any films you can think of in particular that you really want to get out?
You mean individual films in
Yeah,
a
individual, just anything you can think of.
well, there is one, but I can't say what it is. It's a film that most of us know about, but it will be on one of these upcoming sets, and I ju- I don't want to get a flame war going, so I won't say what it is. But
It's fair.
other specific ones, let me see. I'm trying to think about current. Ah, yes, maybe I will finally put it into words here in this show. It's a film that's coming out in the first volume of the early Out of the Inkwell films that I'm putting together for cartoon release. Um, that was a set, or is a set, that's going to cover 15 early Out of the Inkwell films. Now, that's a series that started in late 1918 and it went up until 1927 until it was renamed Inkwell Imps. But basically, in the very early part of that series, there are a few films that are not available. They might be lost until print turns up here and there. And some of them are from the Bray Studios period when Max Fleischer was directing for Bray. But a few weeks ago, I thankfully was finally able to acquire a fully usable, fully presentable print of one of those previously unavailable early Inkwell films. And now, at the very last minute, we pushed it through the pipeline so it could be on that first collection.
Cool.
And it's called The Restaurant. And
Exciting.
basically, Max Fleischer going to a restaurant somewhere in New York City and the little Inkwell clown following him in there and wrecking havoc as he always does and falling into a tough guy's bowl of soup and the tough guy wants to break Max into a million pieces.
Sounds like
So
another fun early one.
yeah, it's one of these films that were made before the clown had a name, so we're not saying Coco yet. It was called the Inkwell Clown. So that's one I'm really looking forward to getting out there within the next, hopefully within the next couple of months. And it had existed. There are people alive that have seen the film before, but up until a couple of months ago, it was something that most of us would not have expected that we would be able to even see at all. So this is an exciting moment to see the restaurant soon for everyone to get to see it. So good
Very
question.
cool.
Yeah.
It's great.
All
It
right.
shows the
Well,
importance of getting these sets.
I'm gonna have to get all of them. Now you've sold me. Anyway, which is a good thing. And if I'm ever in the New York area, I will, try to look you up and try to attend one of your shows. I haven't been in New York in over a decade, so I'm overdue. So
Come on in. Yes, I'll show you the archive and you could do a little video there and show people what it looks like.
very
Mhm.
good. All right. Well, that wraps it up for another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Arnold. We've had special guests Strumm and Tommy Stathes, who has a wide variety of background and interest and projects going on. And I don't know how you do it all, but I'm kind of the same boat. And I appreciate you being on the show today. And
Thank,
we'll see you next time.
thank you, Mark, and take care, everyone.
Okay.
Bye bye.